The War of Five Kings was set in motion right after Ned Stark's execution. Robb Stark had won battle after battle and was undefeated in the field, yet he was losing the war. He needed the Freys to cross the twin towers that controlled the Green Fork crossing. Lord Walder Frey, who was an old resentful man with a castle full of daughters and sons and grandsons all hungry for advancement, would help Robb for a price. Robb would marry a Frey daughter if he is granted safe passage to cross to the southern part of Westeros, King's Landing to be precise. Robb agreed and later fell in love with a nurse named Jane Westerling from the Narrow Sea, and when he finally laid with her, he immediately married her. Because he was his father's son, and a Stark honors his obligations. It was the decision of an honorable man, and in my opinion, it was the major cause of his destruction. Lord Roose Bolton, quiet and pale as a ghost, negotiated his own arrangement with the Lannisters. Walder Frey was offered other matches, if he would help correct the Robb Stark problem, and together they laid a trap for Robb. Robb came to the twins for the wedding of his uncle Edmure Tully to a Frey daughter in place of his broken promise as a peace offering, because he needed Lord Frey's support to reclaim the North, which had been seized by Theon Greyjoy. That proved to be a catastrophic misadventure. He came under the guest right, the sacred covenant that said a host could not harm a guest who had eaten his bread and salt. Walder Frey broke the centuries-old tradition after offering bread and salt to his guest beneath his roof. At the feast following the wedding, when the music changed and the doors were locked, the Freys started murdering the Starks. Robb's direwolf, Grey Wind, was killed in the kennels. The northern lords were cut down where they sat. Lady Stark, seeing it happening, grabbed Walder Frey's wife and pressed a knife to her throat and bargained desperately. Robb was shot full of crossbow bolts. Then Roose Bolton walked up and ran him through, whispering, "The Lannisters send their regards." Lady Stark's throat was cut. In the books, her body was thrown in the river. The Game of Thrones TV series didn't display the aftermath of her death. The North was destroyed by Theon and the War of Five Kings was over, with the Lannisters and Tyrells triumphant. Across the Narrow Sea, Daenerys moved through the world like a force of nature gathering her armies. In Astapor, she bought the Unsullied, the slave soldiers trained from childhood to feel no pain, no fear, and perfect obedience, with a dragon. Specifically, she gave out Drogon as the price. Then she gave Drogon a command to burn the slave masters. And to the Unsullied she gave a command to kill the remaining soldiers loyal to the slave masters. Every slaveholder in Astapor died. The Unsullied were freed and asked to leave or follow her. She took the city and freed its slaves and moved on with majority of the Unsullied following her. In Yunkai and Meereen she repeated the pattern. When Meereen fell, the former slaves rushed to her, calling her Misa, which means mother in their language. She was a 20-year-old woman with 3 dragons and an army and a gift for compelling loyalty. She was also discovering that liberation is not governance. Astapor, after it was abandoned, had collapsed into chaos. She chose to stay in Meereen and rule, learning how to administer a city, learning the 1,000 complications of the peace that follows a conquest. The dragons were growing and becoming harder to control. Back in King's Landing, Joffrey Baratheon married Margaery Tyrell, a match that pleased everyone except Joffrey, who was not capable of being pleased without inflicting pain. At the wedding feast, he humiliated Tyrion, mocked him and drenched him with wine, and commanded his uncle to serve as his cupbearer. Then he drank from a cup poisoned by Olenna Tyrell, who had arranged it with Littlefinger. They believed it was wise to remove Joffrey before he could destroy Margaery, as he destroyed everything he touched. Joffrey died in front of the whole court, purple-faced, clawing at his throat. Cersei screamed and pointed at Tyrion, as the murderer who was still holding the cup, and Tyrion was arrested. The trial was a mockery, the witnesses were coached. Cersei orchestrated every moment, and Tyrion, who could have had a fair hearing and negotiate, was broken by the testimony of the woman he loved, Shae, who appeared as a witness and described their intimacy in the most degrading terms, destroying him. Tyrion demanded trial by combat, and Prince Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper of Dorne, who had come to King's Landing for the wedding and now saw an opportunity, offered to be Tyrion's champion. He had his own reason. In the show, he made it clear it was time to avenge the death of Elia Martell and her kids. Cersei's champion was Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, who was believed to have raped and murdered Oberyn's sister Elia and killed her children during the sack of King's Landing at the end of Robert's rebellion. Oberyn wanted a confession, and this was his chance to extract it while also saving Tyrion. The fight was magnificent and terrible. Oberyn was faster than the Mountain. He spun and stabbed and drove his spear through the Mountain's legs, through his chest, and demanded a confession while the Mountain lay dying. He got close enough for the confession, and the Mountain grabbed him, crushed his skull with his hands while Oberyn screamed. Tyrion was sentenced to death, and was freed by his brother Jaime, who had returned from Robb Stark's captivity, missing a hand, and Varys, who smuggled him out of the city. On the way out, Tyrion stopped at the Tower of the Hand. He found Shae in his father's bed. He strangled her with the hand's chain of office. Then he went to his father's privy, where Tywin was sitting, and put a crossbow bolt through his heart and murdered him. Tyrion fled across the narrow sea, carried by Varys, who believed in a Targaryen restoration and had been working toward it for decades. At the Wall, Jon Snow had gone undercover beyond it, joining Mance Rayder, the king beyond the Wall, who was a former man of the Night's Watch. He had united the free folk into a single army because he believed in one thing with absolute clarity: something worse than any army was coming from the far north, and the free folk needed to cross the Wall to survive. Jon lived with the free folk, earned their tentative trust, fell in love with a red-haired spear wife named Ygritte, and brought back intelligence when he escaped. He watched the free folk army assault the Wall from the south while a raven group scaled the Wall itself. He fought in the defense for days, killing Ygritte himself by accident in the chaos. She died in his arms, whispering, "We should have stayed in that cave." And eventually the attack was broken when Stannis Baratheon's cavalry arrived and shattered the free folk army. Stannis had a new base of operations, the Wall. He needed the North's allegiance. The Night's Watch needed strength and numbers. Jon Snow was elected Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. And Jon Snow was beginning to understand what Mance Rayder had understood. The free folk were not the threat. The White Walkers were moving again and the long night was returning. Bran, meanwhile, had traveled beyond the Wall, carried, guided, accompanied by the Reed siblings Jijin and Mira and by Hodder, following the pull of the three-eyed crow in his dreams. He had become powerful, with his warging abilities growing into something rarer and stranger. The Greenseer ability to enter the weirwood trees and see through time, past and present. He could see what others could not and could become what others could not. They found the three-eyed raven at last. Not a crow but a man, ancient beyond measure, half-merged with the roots of a weirwood tree beneath the ground, kept alive by old magic. His name might have been Brynden Rivers, called Bloodraven, who was a Targaryen bastard, Hand of the King, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and a legendary figure of the Blackfyre rebellions. He was so far buried under centuries of bark and root that it barely mattered and was going to teach Bran to see. Theon Greyjoy had made his catastrophic pivot early in the war, sent by Robb to treat with his father Balon Greyjoy, who wanted to ally with Robb in breaking from the realm. Theon had instead been seduced by his father's contempt and his own hunger for identity. He had seized Winterfell with a small force, capturing the Stark stronghold when it was barely defended. He couldn't hold it when the Northerners moved against him. Rather, he faked the deaths of Bran and Rickon Stark, burning 2 Miller's boys and displaying their charred bodies. Ramsay Snow, the sadistic bastard of Roose Bolton, came with Northern forces, supposedly to relieve Theon, and instead burned Winterfell to the ground, tortured Theon into submission, and kept him as a personal plaything. Ramsay renamed him Reek. Identity stripped down to pure servility, broken physically and psychologically over months of methodical torture. Balon Greyjoy later died when thrown from a bridge in a storm by Euron Greyjoy, the most dangerous of Balon's brothers. The Kingsmoot, the Iron Islands' ancient tradition of choosing kings by acclamation, convened. Euron Greyjoy won it with promises of world conquest and an impossible object, a dragon horn, called Dragonbinder, engraved with Valyrian glyphs that promised dominion over dragons. He claimed to have found it in the smoking ruins of old Valyria. Euron Greyjoy was not like the greedy, limited Balon. He was something older and stranger, a man who had sailed to every dark corner of the world, who had dealt with warlocks and sorcerers, and had drunk shade of the evening until his lips were blue, who had seen and done things that had burned away normal humanity. He believed in power and chaos, and his plan was extravagant. Use the dragon horn to claim Daenerys's dragons, marry Daenerys, and rule the world. Asha Greyjoy, Theon's sister, who had her own claim, fled. Victarion Greyjoy, loyal but limited, was sent east with the fleet to bring Daenerys back. This only appeared in the books, not in the show. In King's Landing, with Tywin dead and Tyrion gone, Cersei Lannister took power as Queen Regent to her son Tommen, Joffrey's gentler, younger brother, who had been crowned in the chaos following the Purple Wedding and who was everything Joffrey was not. Sweet, biddable, genuinely kind. Margaery Tyrell married him immediately she got the opportunity. Margaery's warmth and Tommen's tractability, it should have been a stable union. Cersei would not allow stability. She saw threats everywhere, in Margaery, who might have more influence over Tommen than she did, in the Tyrells, who had too much power, in her son's affection for his new wife. She was not wrong that Margaery and Olenna were playing the game skillfully and against her interests. Rather, she was wrong about how to counter it. She made a catastrophic error of hubris when she rearmed the Faith Militant, the religious military orders that Maegor the Cruel had disbanded a century ago. She thought she was using the High Sparrow, a humble, apparently harmless septa who had risen to become the High Septon, as a weapon against Margaery. She armed his soldiers, gave them authority, validated their power. Then they arrested Lors Tyrell for alleged adultery and fornication, accused by one of his partners. Then they arrested Cersei Lannister for her adultery with Lancel Lannister and others. Cersei sat in a cell and realized she had handed the most powerful religious institution in the realm the authority to destroy her, and they were using it. Everything she had built against the Tyrells had been turned against her. She was given one escape: confession. She confessed to lesser charges, which was the adultery with Lancel, not the incest with Jaime, and was sentenced to a walk of atonement through King's Landing. From the September of Baelor to the Red Keep, she walked naked through the streets while a septa rang a bell and cried shame, 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 and the people of King's Landing, who had never loved her, stoned her with whatever they could find. She endured it and reached the Red Keep. And at the gates stood a massive figure in white armor, her new champion, a knight for her King's Guard, monstrous and enormous, who did not speak and showed no face. Qyburn, her new master of whispers and an unethical former maester, had been working in his lab. The mountain had not died of Oberyn's poisoned spear. Gregor Clegane had been transformed into something. It was hard to say, but will only serve Cersei. Cersei walked inside, holding herself together. The rage and the determination hardened into something diamond bright. Those who had done this to her would answer for it. Tyrion crossed the narrow sea and spent months drowning himself in misery, wine, self-pity, and nihilism. He had killed his lover and his father. He was a kinslayer and a murderer and a fugitive, and he embraced the degradation as appropriate. Then Varys explained what he had always been working toward: a Targaryen restoration. Daenerys was in Meereen, ruling. She needed advisors who knew Westerosi politics. She needed someone who could bridge the world she was from and the world she would conquer. Tyrion was captured by Jorah Mormont, Daenerys's exiled knight, trying to buy his way back into her favor by delivering a Lannister as a gift, and both of them ended up in Meereen via the slave trading routes, surviving slavers and stone men, the grayscale afflicted victims they encountered in the ruins of the old Valyria, from one of whom Jorah contracted the disease. In Meereen, Tyrion proved his worth. He was smarter than almost anyone around Daenerys. He understood the political landscape of Westeros in ways her other advisors couldn't. He became, gradually, something like a useful advisor, and began to genuinely believe in her. Meereen was consuming her. The Sons of the Harpy, who were a masked insurgent movement representing the old slaveholding class, were assassinating unsullied in the streets and in the fighting pits. Daenerys tried compromise and even reopened the fighting pits. She tried to negotiate with the old families by agreeing to marry the Meereenese nobleman Hisdar zo Loraq. She locked her dragons in the catacombs because they were growing and becoming dangerous. At one point, Drogon had burned a child. She reopened the fighting pits with a grand ceremony. During the fight, the sons of the Harpy attacked her and Drogon appeared in the skies when her life was threatened. Daenerys climbed on Drogon's back and flew. She held on because there was nothing else to do, and she flew out over the ocean on the back of a dragon for the first time. He landed eventually on the grass of the Dothraki Sea and would not go back. She was stranded on the plains, alone, with a dragon who was not a pet, surrounded by the vast emptiness of the Dothraki world. She ate bugs and berries and waited, and eventually, in what the story promises will resolve in Winds of Winter, a vast khalasar found her. Back in Meereen, Tyrion found himself ruling the city with the best tools available and the worst circumstances imaginable. The fleet of Yunkai and its allies was preparing to attack the harbor. The sons of the Harpy were at their most active, and Daenerys was missing. At Castle Black, Jon Snow, as Lord Commander, made decision after decision that alienated the Watch. He negotiated with the Free Folk, letting them through the gate. At Hardhome, things went catastrophically and meaningfully wrong when the others came. Jon had led a ranging to Hardhome to rescue the Free Folk gathered there, and the others came in force. Thousands of whites attacked from the tree line. The White Walkers themselves rode among them. Jon's Valyrian steel sword Longclaw shattered a White Walker, a revelation that Valyrian steel worked against them just as dragonglass, but thousands died, and worse, every dead person rose again at the end as a white. The Night King raised his arms, and the dead stood and matched at his command. Jon escaped with a fraction of the Free Folk. The others had just acquired thousands more soldiers. Jon came back to the Wall with this report and his decisions and his politics. He offended the Watch systematically, letting the Free Folk through the Wall, ranging beyond it, treating the Watch's ancient enemies as allies. Then a letter arrived from Ramsay Bolton, demanding the return of Ramsay's bride, Sansa, and Reek, promising violence against the Watch if Jon refused. Jon read the letter and made a decision to march against the Boltons. The hurdle was to secure allies. The Night's Watch conspired, led by Ser Allison, who believed Jon had broken his vows by involving the Watch in Westerosi politics. They tricked Jon and stabbed him in the courtyard. For the Watch, each man said as the blade went in. Jon Snow fell in the snow, and the last thing he saw was Ghost, his direwolf. Melisandre was at the Wall when Jon died. Beric Dondarrion had been raised 6 times by a Red Priest. The Lord Commander's body was kept, and the question hung over the story like a winter sunrise. Arya Stark had traveled far from the girl who watched her father die. She escaped King's Landing, survived the Riverlands during the war, hiding, running, briefly imprisoned at Harrenhal under the Lannisters, where she served as a servant and orchestrated the escape of prisoners with the help of an assassin named Jaqen H'ghar, who owed her 3 deaths. She made a list: Cersei, Walder Frey, Tywin Lannister, Joffrey Baratheon, and recited it every night like a prayer. She found Sandor Clegane, the Hound who became her unlikely protector for a long time. Sandor was a pragmatic killer who had no illusions about anything and respected her for having none about him. They arrived at the twins just after the Red Wedding. Arya saw the Stark wolf head mounted on Robb's headless body and screamed while they escaped the chaos. The Hound tried to ransom her to her aunt Lisa in the Vale, and realized Lisa was dead. He tried various other plans. In a brutal series of events, Brienne of Tarth, searching for Sansa on Catelyn's command, now Posthumus found her. The Hound and Brienne fought a savage battle on a cliff which ended up with the Hound severely wounded. Arya left him dying, refused to give him the mercy of a quick death, and found a ship which was sailing to Braavos. She had an iron coin, given to her by Jaqen H'ghar with a phrase Vala Morgulis, which means all men must die. She crossed the narrow sea to the House of Black and White, the temple of the many-faced god, the death cult served by the faceless men, of which Jaqen H'ghar was one. She had been chosen or had chosen herself. She would learn to be no one, to set aside Arya Stark, her list, her identity, her face, and serve the god of death impartially. She was terrible at being no one and was still Arya Stark, and the list was carved into her. She murdered a man on his list without being sanctioned to do so, using her training for her own purposes. For this, she was blinded as punishment. Tyrion will survive the chaos at Meereen. He will become, in some form, an essential part of Daenerys's court. The meeting of these two minds, the exiled Lannister and the last Targaryen, will shape what follows. Arya returned to herself partially, inevitably. The Faceless Men gave her a mission to murder an actress playing Cersei in a stage play called Lady Clay, and she was eventually involved in a murder of someone she should not have and spared Lady Clay. The House of Black and White tried to kill her, which made her escape. Arya Stark came back to Westeros as no one. The Winds of Winter book is not finished yet. According to the accepts of the book and available fan theories, Sansa started playing the game in the Vale with Littlefinger. The Lords of the Vale and their politics. She is becoming formidable, and the question of when she recognizes that Littlefinger is not a mentor but a predator, and what she does about it, is one of the story's great dramatic promises. In the TV adaptation, Game of Thrones, the show ended abruptly with many fans unsatisfied with the rush to end the show. Meanwhile, the Walkers are marching south. The Wall has held for 8,000 years, but the Wall has a weakness. There is a gate through it at the Night Fort, the oldest of the castles, and there are ancient oaths about what is owed to the dead. And the Horn of Joramun, said to be able to bring the Wall down, may or may not have been destroyed. Something is coming, and the preparations are insufficient, and the armies of Westeros are busy killing each other. What Martin has said about his ending, what can be inferred from the architecture of the story, and what the themes demand. Ice and fire, the two forces named in the title, are not simply metaphors. They represent the long night against humanity's warmth, the others and their cold silence against the dragons and their burning purpose, and, perhaps, the reunion of ice, the Starks of the North, and fire, the Targaryens, the dragon fire. The prince that was promised, Azor Ahai reborn, has multiple claimants. Melisandre believed it was Stannis. She has begun to suspect Jon Snow. Daenerys has her own claims on the prophecy. The resolution may be that the prophecy is not as literal as all its believers assume, or that it requires both of them, the ice and the fire together. The Night King will come. The Wall will fall or be breached. The great war that the Night's Watch had been warning about for thousands of years. Mance Rayder saw the same war coming, and Bran through the weirwood trees. The living will have to unite or die. The dragons will play a crucial role in defeating the Night King and his army. Dragonglass and Valyrian steel are another thing. The children of the forest, who created the White Walkers, a revelation from Bran's green sights. The children made the first White Walker using a captured First Man, and driving a piece of dragonglass into his heart as a weapon against the First Men, and it eventually escaped their control. The Stark children will be at the center of the Great War. Bran sees everything. His power grows toward something. A green seer in the tree might be an instrument of memory or of action. Arya kills, Jon fights, and Sansa governs. Rickon, who's the youngest, was lost in the Battle of the Bastards. According to George R.R. Martin, the ending will be bittersweet. Not triumphant, not tragedy. The cost will be real. Characters we love will die. What is preserved will be preserved at a price. The world that remains will be different from the world that was. The Iron Throne itself, that jagged monument to conquest, made of swords melted into ugliness by dragon fire, may not survive. Daenerys has dreamed of destroying it. Martin has said that the system it represents, the way of ruling it embodies, is a question the series keeps asking. Is this any way to run a world? A chair made of weapons? A kingdom ruled by who can seize it? An inheritance system that puts Joffreys on thrones? There are no clean answers. There are only people, trying, against the tide of history and winter and the long dark, to hold something worth holding. Vala Morgulis, all men must die. Vala